evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and if the final nail hadn't already been struck on the Demons 2024 season, then Saturday night's heartbreaking 2-point loss to the Giants might have been the straw that broke the Demons' back. Joining me tonight to dissect another heartbreaking nail-biter at the MCG is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Ben Man. Good evening to all our loyal listeners, and thank you again for turning up, joining us tonight after another loss, instead of watching the Olympics, where apparently we're winning lots. So thank you very much for once again listening to us idiots.
I thought you were going to say thank you for turning up to the game on Saturday night, all tens of us.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later, but yeah, thank you to those who turned up to the game as well.
And also joining us tonight to mathematically prove that the Demons are still in the box seat to Bradbury our way into the finals on the way to premiership glory is Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And I'm almost, but not quite ready to quit as the program's optimist. It was a bitterly cold night, and I was just saying, so apologies up front. I've just literally walked in the door from work, so if I'm a bit scattered, then that's the reason why. This coffee right next to me probably won't help much, but I could have done with a coffee at the MCG on Saturday night. Geez, it was cold, wasn't it? It was, as I said just before we started, I don't recall. It's been a long time since I've been that furious at the umpires and the standard of the umpires at a game of footy. I can't even remember the last time I was just so livid and still livid, to be honest. And I'm furious with the AFL, not with those umpires. So I'm sure I'll get the opportunity to vent tonight about it. But it was a super, super frustrating loss, wasn't it? Geez, we've had some heartbreaking losses this year, but just a little bit of perspective. And I think it's really important, the perspective on it. And I've been reflecting on this all week, in fact, even in the lead up to the game. Is this game started, the betting in this game was dead even. So it was coin toss. We lost the game by 2 points. They're a pretty good side, GWS. I reckon they've got some issues. They're not as strong as I actually had sort of thought they were, but it was a toss-up game. We lose by 2 points. We kick a bit more accurately. We win the game. If, to be perfectly honest, it's one of those games that 100%, it's impossible, just impossible not to acknowledge that the umpires played a massive role in that result. And it's just not good enough. I'm so sick of the AFL. I'm sick of this sport being run like a hokey sort of suboptimal amateur level sport when people like yourselves, all the people, the 16,000 people who turned up to the footy, George, and all the people who post on Demonland are so passionate about the sport and so passionate about the Demon. About the Demons. I just think the AFL treat us all like fools, and I'm just over it, really, to be honest.
We'll be talking a bit more about the umpiring because we do have a question about it. But before we get into that, each week I do put out a call to our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We really love the feedback, and we do reward our loyal listeners who have taken that time to provide these 5-star reviews by giving them a shout out on the show. So if you can spend a couple of minutes of your day, less than that, just giving us a shout out, we'll give you the shout out. So Elijah writes, incredible insights and amazing hosts. Love the show. Listen every week. Andy and Bin Man are incredible hosts, especially when tensions arise between optimism and pessimism. However, Uncle George is my favourite host. Incredibly insightful and a part of the fabric of the Melbourne Football Club. And thanks for that fantastic review, Elijah. Even if Uncle George is your favourite host. And George, are you paying relatives now to write us reviews?
I was going to say, George, just tell Elijah maybe just to drop the uncle bit because it's a bit of a tell.
I was going to say he's got to suck up a little bit better than that to get the Porsche or the Lotus.
Well, you can give him his ski racks.
That's surely it's a Range Rover for a Melbourne supporter. Come on.
No.
That's why you weren't at the footy on Saturday, wasn't it? Because there was finally some snow.
No. Snow's in February.
Well, guys, keep that feedback coming. We'll give you that shout out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast posts each week or slide into our DMs. Not going to read out your full name on the show. Keep your anonymity. In addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all your preferred podcasting app, the Demonland podcast is available to be watched and listened to on YouTube. Just search for Demonland Podcast to find our channel. If you want to chat with other Demon fans, you've never been to our forum, and this is a plug for our fantastic forum, demonland.com. Head over there, sign up. You can chat with other Demon fans from across Australia and around the world, or completely free. Just sign up. You'll be able to post questions or comments for this show, and also there's heaps of topics to rant about the Demons week in, week out. So join in on the conversation, and if you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of these topics we're going to talk about, please give us a call on 0390163666. That's 0390163666. I'll answer. I'll put you on mute and bring you on when we can. You know, usually when there's a break in the conversation, maybe hold it off till after Big Man Stats Files. During the week, you can call that number, leave us a message, we'll play it on the show. If you are listening live, come join us in the chat room. Head on over to demonland.com/podcast. We are live every Monday, so if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at a new time of 7:30 p.m. Now, I'll just get into the match overview very quickly. In a nail-biting encounter at the MCG, the Demons were handed a heart-wrenching 2-point defeat by the GWS Giants. The loss sees the Demons fall to 11th on the ladder, with their final hopes hanging by a thread, needing to win their remaining 4 matches to secure a place in September action. The Demons burst out of the block, kicking 5-1 and establishing a 27-point lead at the first break. The return of skipper Max Gawn provided an early boost, although some missed opportunities through poor disposal meant the margin could have been greater. GWS responded with a remarkable turnaround, kicking 12 of the next 15 goals. Their midfield took control and they broke down Melbourne's defensive structures with effective run and spread. Jesse Hogan, facing his former club, played a pivotal role with 4 goals, including 3 in the critical period from late in the third quarter to early in the last. The Giants opened the final term with 4 goals in the first 7 minutes, turning a 3-point lead into a 27-point buffer. The Demons launched a desperate late surge, kicking 3 consecutive goals to narrow the margin. Alex Neal-Bullen snapped with 70 seconds left, brought them within 2 points, but Tom Green's crucial centre clearance secured the win for GWS. Clayton Oliver, with 26 disposals, led the fight back, showing his class despite recent criticism. Jack Viney was consistent throughout, providing leadership and drive. Jake Lever provided strong defensive presence, crucial in intercepting GWS attacks. Ed Langdon was effective on the wing, contributing to both defence and attack. Trent Rivers had a solid performance, supporting the midfield. Melbourne coach Simon Goodwin coached from the bench despite recovering from a severe infection, demonstrating his commitment, but ultimately facing disappointment as his side fell short. A truly disappointing turnout of 16,246 fans witnessed the thrilling encounter in Arctic conditions, marking the lowest attendance at the MCG this season. Melbourne's season now hangs in the balance as the Demons face a crucial clash against the Western Bulldogs next Friday, a game they must win to keep their finals hopes alive. With 4 rounds left, Melbourne needs to address some of these inconsistencies and find their best form to make a late push for September. Big man, you'll be happy to know that we didn't get any comments this week from the Pearl regarding your stats files. Someone took George's keyboard away from him during the week. So far away with
there
some
was
stats.
one from Elijah, saying that.
Yeah, that's right. He can't do 2 things at once.
Just stats file or just reflections on the game?
We're going to talk about the game, so let's get straight into stats files.
Just a reflection ahead of the,
Okay.
the stat files is that, again, I've been reflecting on perspective and, and putting things in perspective. And I was immensely proud of the D's to come back into that match. I don't know that I'm alone in thinking after that 4th goal, particularly the way it happened. I'm pretty sure the 4th goal in the last quarter was the one where T-Mac sort of played on and Green tapped the ball down when he handballed. Is that the one that was the gimme? So it created the gimme goal over the top. I don't think I was alone. People were leaving around me. It was already pretty empty where I was sitting, but people were leaving the ground. I've never left a game of footy. Once I have, and had to go to a funeral, but I've never left a game of footy. And geez, I was tempted though. It was freezing, and I thought we were gone. I thought it was going to be a blowout. So I was really proud of the effort for the players to get back into that match. It was, I don't know about you guys. Did you think we're about to get smashed by 50, 60 points?
Absolutely. But I think people were leaving to avoid the funeral. But
yeah, and the 100%. Like, there's no sense. I read someone put on Demonland that we'd put the Giants put the queue in the rack. They 100% did not, and their final. We'll talk about it in a sec, but their final quarter pressure was amazing. Was 200, and it was the reason that we actually didn't win the game. I thought was the Giants' effort. So from a stats file perspective, I actually thought it was a really interesting game. Coming into the game, the way we played, it seems to me that there was two sort of elements to it. We really played a sort of a very strong focus on territory, looking down at the binoculars at the screen in front of the players. The top line was contest is king, and then the three subheaders were one brain, defence, and contest. And it was clear. And then at the board, as I said, there's sort of a number of statistics, but one of the quadrants on the board that they show the players is reinforcement/solutions, and the big at the end of the third quarter, 183 pressure was in a big circle and highlighted. So they came into the game obviously from those messages with a clear focus on contest and pressure. That's just the way, you're not going to go into footy without that. And it felt to me that it was really sort of the sort of style that I've been talking about, that coming to finals that we're going to be wanting to play, which is still sort of looking for transition, but creating turnovers and forward half. And so the inside 50 the time forward half, I should say, in that first quarter was something like 63-37. So it really did look like a Melbourne style, like a much more traditional goodie style. And where it was curious is that, there's no question we're struggling to cover the ground. We're suboptimal in terms of our sort of ability to run our quarters, and also our leg speed has been a sort of issue. And just like every team is basically trying to do it to us, which is, if you think all the way back even to Hawthorn in round 2, is looking to spread us. And in the second quarter, the game got on their terms again, on the Giants' terms, by exactly that, by getting us out to the open. A number of players couldn't make ground, like even Andy Menzies-Wakefield, who's got really good wheels. At one point, I forget who he was chasing, but he just couldn't make ground on him. And the Giants really looked to exploit that, and I thought they did a really sort of good job in that respect. Then the third quarter was really just a good old-fashioned arm wrestle. The last quarter, it was really done. The game was lost in that first sort of 5-6 minutes, and I know we'll get into those centre clearances. But again, I thought we were incredibly impressive to fight our way back into that match. And, I was thinking I was going to sit there and see a 50-point flogging. So to actually have an opportunity to win that game, and, we'll probably unpack this as well, that was a really disappointing final centre bounce. But, to have an opportunity to take it out of the centre and win the game still was not what I was expecting after that walking goal after the T-Mac era. So opposition score, they were definitely benefited from their accuracy, 13-7. It was great. Hogues is one of my all-time favourite players. I'd love him back at the D's. Just imagine Hogues and JBR roaming the forward 50 and hand it to him with that crazy sort of stutter step style he's got. He's got it working, and he took his chances. He was super impressive. So I thought we actually did reasonably well to keep them to the score we did. We got partly because of the way we were playing in the defensive space, we got our intercept game going better than it's been for ages, actually. So we had 78 intercepts to their 72, so +6 for intercepts. But this number was one that was terrific, and we've been struggling. We certainly struggled in it last week, and this is our best number for a long time, is 20 intercept marks we took to their 9. So we were +11, and that's really the sort of goodie the one sort of key indicator of Goody's old style is forcing the opposition to cough up the ball and to intercept. I forget at what point, halfway through the second quarter, maybe it was the beginning of the second quarter, they had a heap of clangers, so their sort of kicking was a bit off. In the contest, contested possessions, just a reminder about what contested possessions are. They include hard ball gets, loose ball gets, contested marks, gather from hit-outs, contested knock-ons, and freeze for. We were right in at contested possessions, 137, 141, and that was pretty much sort of level the whole game. It wasn't really a point in the game where we fell away. So, we obviously started fast, and that was to do, as much as anything, that was to do with our pressure. It was our inability to sort of cover their spread was the problem in the second quarter. Just some interesting numbers in terms of, where those contested possessions were. We were +6 for loose ball gets in our defensive 50, which is really good in terms of our ability to get to cross to the loose ball. So it's, kudos to the defenders, but also +3 for hard ball gets down back. That was excellent as well. +4 for ruck hard ball gets, which was a curious stat in our forward 50. But sort of the flip to this, we were -8 for loose ball gets. And once again, it was one of those in our forward 50. Once again, I thought it was one of those games where we struggled to keep these small players, Daniel and Green, in check. In terms of post clearance, which is a really important stat, we were +3 for hard ball gets, and we were -5 though for loose ball gets once it was out in the open. And I think that speaks to our struggles to with the run in our legs, and they had a lot of better runners than us. And then pre-clearance, this was incredible figure actually. We were +10 for pre-clearance for hard ball gets. So we were really working hard before the clearance, and that's a huge number, +10. This one won't sort of please anyone. We were -6 for gather from hitouts. So that's a sort of indication, I think, and there's a question about this, but 𝗪cie was clearly, what did you guys think? It seemed to me 𝗪cie was clearly carrying something.
100%.
Was he?
100%.
Yeah, he still is, but I also think we planned really poorly. There are a lot, we'll talk about it later, but the setups were absolutely appalling.
Yeah,
we were trying to play absolutely appalling.
Yeah, and particularly the very last one.
You just got to see it in the last quarter.
Well, actually, it was the very last one of the game.
Yeah. That just exemplified everything that had been going on before. But we'll talk about that shortly. Yeah,
and just on that, there's your point that you made last week. That's as much on, or in fact, arguably more on the midfield coaches and the coaching rather than the players. Like, I've heard 𝗪cie say he hits to a designated spot, and if the designated spot, there's no one, there. So pressure was, our first quarter was elite. 201 was our pressure. We were +30. They were 171 in that first quarter. So it was fantastic. That first quarter, in hindsight, obviously, after the game, it's crushing disappointment losing the game, but shouldn't forget how good we were in that first quarter. And as I think is suggested, Andy, if we'd taken our chances a little bit more, that game could have been done and dusted almost. We needed to get it out a little bit further, but 201 was enormous in that first quarter. And we had them genuinely had them on the back foot. All credit to them, and they deserve credit. So our second quarter pressure rating was 185, which is a 180 is considered average. So 185 is above average. Their pressure in that second quarter was 207. They were +22 for pressure, which is just fantastic. You've got to give credit to the Giants for that. It's not as if we didn't sort of work hard in that space. They just outworked us. They were incredible. Where I think the game was sort of, of course, those first 10 minutes or the first 6 or 7 minutes of the last quarter were the obvious one you could pick. But it was really that third quarter we came out way too flat. We're 159 pressure rating in that third quarter they were 182, so down 23. And then in the last quarter, this is when we were, again, I thought our effort to stay in that game was terrific, but you cannot knock. You can't even sort of consider that they put their cue in the rack or let us back into the game. Their pressure in that last quarter was 200. So they had 2 quarters at 200 at elite level, another quarter where they were 22. So the second quarter, they were +22, third quarter +23, and last quarter +23 for pressure. So we were +30 in that first quarter. for the whole match, we were down 9. So credit to the Giants for the way they got themselves back into that game in the second quarter with the pressure that they applied and kept it going for the rest of the match. I want to give a huge shout out for Clayton Oliver. I did some of the discussion on Demonland and sort of as triggered by Corns' comments. Just remarkable, really, in some respects. He's one of the greatest players I've ever seen, full stop. Certainly one of the greatest Melbourne players. He's had 36 individual pressure acts. 36, I repeat, 36, and he was cooked by the end of the game. His effort was just enormous. Like, I've been watching him, and it's a point I made on Demonland. He is finishing each quarter almost vomiting how much he's working. Like, you watch him at the end of quarters, he's leaving nothing out there. His effort is extraordinary. 36 pressure acts, 73 pressure points. His season average is only it's pretty high, 45. So almost, not far, or at least sort of 50% above his season average for pressure points. It was just fantastic, his effort all game. As a good sort of indicator, Nibbler, who is in the top 5 every single week for pressure acts, he was second, but he had 9 less pressure acts, so 27, but he also had 70 pressure points. So fantastic game from Nibbler. Just says everything you want to know about Nibbler. Is his season average for pressure is 54.1. 𝗍𝗲𝗰𝗀𝗀𝗀 was third, 27 pressure acts. Bailey Laurie, and we'll talk about him later, much better game statistically than, I've got to check my confirmation bias with him. His game was a lot better, I think, when in the cool light of day, and particularly when I looked at his numbers, than I felt like it was at the game. So he's had 25 pressure acts. His pressure points was 52. He's averaging only 22 pressure acts, so well and truly above twice his season average. Chin was next, and Caleb Windsor, he was enormous again. Ground ball gets, I've been talking about the increased importance of this in our game, and it looks like we're really getting it back in shape to a large degree. We were +5 for ground ball gets. Tackles, we had 6 less tackles with them, 57-63. So, not terrible, but I'm sure they would have preferred that to be in the positive. But we had 9 tackles inside 50, +4 for tackles inside 50. This one's a really interesting one. So, of course, there'll be, there's the obvious that last quarter, and, we'll get into it. But there were in centre clearances, these are just the raw totals. Centre clearances were 12-14, so they were +2. They were only +2 for centre clearances. Unfortunately, I think 4 of them were in the first 6 minutes of the last. And their stoppage clearances, we were split 24 all. So, we around the grounds stoppages we were fine, even with Maxi. Briggsy's a big fella, isn't he? And I thought he rucked. Well, he certainly took advantage of his sort of strength advantage. He was pretty impressive in that sense. So the turnover game, sort of this idea of the transition from back half, it felt very much like an older style Melbourne game. I think really this is a reflection of our struggles with our ability to cover the ground. We only scored 13 points from the defensive half. Our season average is 31. So, we couldn't really hurt them from deep in our defence. We were struggling to cover ground and open up the ground. Against that, we only conceded 34 against our season average of 31.7 points from the defensive half. So not bad defending from defensive half, but I mentioned last week we're bottom 4 for points for defensive half and points against, which 16 of the last 17 flag winners have had I think it's turnover stats, the scores from turnover. They've been in the top 4, I think, but they're sort of the same, the two sides of the same coin. So speaking of scores from turnover, we went, again, this was really quite an impressive number. So our season average is 44 points. Goody would have been thrilled with what it looked like. So we had 56 points on turnover, and we defended turnover really well. So 48 points. 48.2 is our season average, and they only could score 34 of their points from turnover. So from that perspective, a really, really huge positive. And Goody would have been thrilled with the turnover numbers. He noted that in the presser, about how that we did well in that space. Just an interesting thing in terms of the chain start region. So where the scoring begins, the first part of the chain begins. I thought this was really interesting. For the season, we average only 6.1 stoppages, 6.1 points from stoppages inside our forward 50. We got 20 points in this game. So a really big bounce, and sort of a similar sort of number. Turnover, we're averaging 7.3 when we turn it over in our forward 50. We got 23 points in this match. Super impressive. We're averaging 25 points against for turnovers on the wing, and we only gave up 13 from that area in this game. From turnover, but we gave up 18 points from stoppages in the wing. So, we did pretty well in the turnover space. And this was the one that's, I guess, curious is that centre bounce, the scores from stoppages, we're averaging. They scored 27 points. We scored 27. They scored 32. So they were +5 only for scores from stoppages. But of course, those 4 goals in the last quarter, you take them away and we smash them for scores from stoppages, and we win the game. So against a season average of 22 points, 22.4 points from stoppages, we scored above our season average, 27. Unfortunately, we're only 19.8 from the opposition scores from stoppages, and they scored 32. So in the fitness, so in that last category, I talked earlier in the season is that the question for me is whether hopefully we're holding back looking to peak, or that we're just not going to get there. And I think, I'll talk about this a bit later, is that, we're clearly struggling to run out games. Clearly sort of our fitness, fitness is the wrong word. Clearly our sort of conditioning isn't at the point, where it needs to be at this stage, and may not get there. It's probably not going to be able to get there. The one thing against that is come finals, and even come this week on a much smaller ground, the Dogs won't be able to stretch us the way Freo and the Giants did on the sort of space of the Optus Oval and the MCG. On a much narrower ground, it will really help us in terms of making the game super contest heavy, forward half intense, because I think that's our only that's our chance. If we do get the opportunity to play finals, that's going to be our chance, is to, in those high pressure finals games, it always devolves to a sort of a contest forward half game, and it will again this year. I'm absolutely positive it will. But I think in some respects, Clary is like a perfect sort of metaphor for our season, because he worked his guts out. He's come off there's been sort of also chat on Demonland, is the reality is that if you don't get a proper preseason in, you are never going to get back to anywhere near optimal shape during the season. It's just not possible. And he not only didn't have a ideal preseason, he had a whole bunch of stuff to deal with. Like, I recall Burgess saying, and I've heard Sam Walsh say this, I've heard Cripps say this, I've heard multiple people say it. I forget the sort of specifics, but the gold standard is 90% of the list do 90% of the gold standard of preseason. 90% of the list do 90% of every single session, and we've been nowhere near that. We would have been lucky to have 60% of the list, or have 70% doing 75%. And Clary, he probably will have only done 60% of all of the sessions, but his effort was fantastic, and I couldn't be prouder of his effort. So all in all, super frustrating game, but like some real positives. As I said, Goody would be thrilled with the turnover numbers. The stoppage numbers weren't too bad, except they blew out in that last quarter.
That they did, and we'll talk about that shortly. Let's get into our listener questions. Jano2 asks, why can't we seal these close games? Monocular also asks, what is it in close finishes? Though we did come from well behind. Our best is good, but our worst is bad. Is that typical of clubs that finish 7th to 14th? I must say we had the luxury of not taking too much interest in those rankings the past 3 years. What is needed to get more consistency? We do have a classy list of youngsters: McVie, Windsor, AMW, JVR, Chandler, maybe Turner, Howes, K. Brown, Seston, and yes, Bowie. if he can get a clear run at a pre-season and get over his injury, which has impacted him significantly. Is it youth and inexperience under pressure that is costing us? I guess, while the margin ended up being close, I'm not sure if this game can be filed under a close one, despite that scoreline at the end. The 4 goals in the first 7 minutes of the last quarter sunk us. The fight back was valiant, but the damage was probably done. George, is our inexperience, is it that inexperience that's costing us in these games?
No, I don't think it. I don't think it's inexperience at all. I think our young players are providing exemplary input into the side. The people like McVie and Windsor coming into the side. What we've seen is this season is a dramatic drop off. Firstly, from their quality players. At the end of the day, that's what gets you higher up the ladder. We've lost Petrarca. We've lost Brayshaw. Spargo's lost somewhere.
Smith.
We've lost Ben Brown.
And I forget about Spargo all the time. He's one of our better kicks inside 50.
We've lost Hunter. We've lost Salem. All of these players.
Lost Holt, for this game as well.
Yeah, but these are the top, certainly from the last couple of years, these are our top echelon players, and we haven't got them. We've replaced them with only a couple of good youngsters. The sad part is when you go Petrarca, Brayshaw, Spargo, Brown, Hunter, Salem, the list goes on, there's 7 players. We've got probably 3 or 4 to replace them, and the end result is we've had to replace them with players who wouldn't ordinarily be playing. The other sad part is that the players who we expected to replace injuries and lift us up that bit, McAdam, Billings, Fullerton and 𝗟𝗶𝗀𝗃𝗁 are all busily playing either at the fringe or down at 𝗙𝗶𝗱𝗃𝗁 and not putting in anything at all. So we finish up putting in a whole stack of youngsters to fill the holes because we don't have anybody else. So it's not surprising where we are at the moment. Wowie's not up to AFL standard yet. Laurie's probably the same. They should be playing at 𝗙𝗂𝗃 to get further miles in learning their trade, but we've had to bring them in simply because we've got no one else. There's no one at 𝗙𝗂𝗃 saying, put their hands up and saying, I need to be selected. We've got the JVRs up there already playing. We've got McVie's playing. Our list is very thin because of the circumstances that we've found ourselves in. But the danger is what's going to happen into the future.
I just disagree. The list isn't thin. You just mentioned how many players are injured. That's just a reality. It's exactly the same scenario with Collingwood.
Yeah.
That's what I talked last week. I just don't agree that the.
But we're not going to have Ben Brown next year. We're not going to have Hunter.
No, but I'm not. But
we're not going to have Brayshaw.
Of course. But the thing is, we started the season with a list of 42, not 44, because we couldn't replace Smith. 2 of our starting 22 players, and one of them in our top 10 players in Gus, 2 senior players with, at the peak of their physical career. They'll never be better, those 2 players, in terms of their physical thingo. So we started with a list with 42, and you just, as you said, just rattled off all of those injuries. So I disagree that our list is thin. We've had injuries that we have not been able to cover. And I made this point to my mate at the footy. If I forget about it all the time, but Petrarca was number 1 when he was injured. He was number 1 for score involvements in the AFL by a country mile. Not just at Melbourne, in the AFL. And he is one of the best players I've ever seen play footy. If you took him out of any team, if you took Dacos out of Collingwood, they would struggle. If you took Neal out of, but it's not just that; it's the timing of it. And what I was thinking of, if you took Robbie Flower out of a late 70s, early 80s Melbourne team, that one player, it's the equivalent. That's the equivalent. That's the level of which he's impact, and he's by far our most dynamic and impactful player. And not having him in these moments, I reckon even just with him in this side, we would have won that game. That's the difference that he would have made to this. So, I don't think it's a matter of our list being thin. It's just that we've had soldiers go out and that you just can't cover them.
And that's the problem. We can't cover them.
add to that,
but no team can. No team, literally no team can.
Yeah, but
that's the thing. Look at what's happening to the Swans. The Swans lose Papley and they lose one or two players. They've lost 4 of their last 5 games. For the first time all season, they've had some injuries and they've dropped 4 or 5 games.
Yeah, and that's the same with every team. You lose your top echelon of players, you're not going to win matches. But
exactly, but no one's saying Collingwood's system.
We're not replacing Brayshaw. We're not replacing Smith. We're not
this
replacing
year,
Hunter.
Next year.
We're not replacing Ben Brown. That's our problem for the future. It's not about what's happening today.
Why won't we be replacing Gus and Smith? I don't understand that. Of course we will. We're going to go to the market and we'll have a shitload of money.
I'll tell you why. Because we've only got pick 8. Our next pick is 38. And
we'll trade someone in.
Every other side has an extra couple of $1 million in the bank as well this year with the competitive.
And we've got Gus's contract.
Yeah,
so we'll go to the market and get some quality players to replace Gus and Smith.
I will guarantee you they're not available.
Who? Quality players?
Yeah, well, there's only 2 free agents left out of all the great lists that started, Tim English and Patrick Dangerfield.
That's for next year, but free agents, it's always the year after is the one because they move in the year before. So, we're well positioned. Of course, we'll replace them. Well, I mean, hopefully we'll replace them with someone elite as well.
Well, I don't think they're available, and I don't think we will because we haven't got the currency to be able to replace them in draft picks or money.
Add to all you were saying, George, Gawn being out the last 2 weeks and having to play our 2 forwards as ruckman, that certainly hasn't helped bashing these 2 guys around all game in the ruck. Now, George, while I've got you here, we have had a voicemail praising your questioning of the team's fitness from last week's podcast. We received this voicemail from Dan the Demon via Instagram Messenger. Sounded like he was on his way home from the ground on Saturday night. There seems to be a 1-minute limit to voice messages on the Instagram platform. So Dan got cut off twice. I also had to bleep out a number of expletives, but you'll get the gist of what he has to say. So here's Dan the Demon in regards to what George said about fitness last week.
Guys, I love your podcast, but I don't think I've ever said this about how much I rate what George said on the last podcast is we just look unfit. It's like you literally cannot buy fitness. You have to work for it. When you work for your fitness, you don't give up leads. You don't give up, suddenly 5 goals, bang, down the drain, because you can't run, You have the running fitness. You have the guts and the hunger to not let that slide and just be like, oh, what happened? Oh, because they just got it back easy. We work for that. We tackled them, pressure the out of them, and then what do? Oh, we're satisfied for now. Thank you. We'll just sit back at quarter time and have a Red Bull or whatever, and then go, oh, that's good. It's almost like we sort of do bits and pieces for the game, go, yes, that will do for now. Yeah, we've done it, Good on you, we've shown them, and then there's moments later that we can't lift, and nobody can lift. At the same time, we literally have nobody able to do anything. I'm like, you cannot possibly explain the lack of movement and the lack of run in that second quarter. I was like, what the are we literally doing? It's almost like we're standing still. They weren't earning their goals at all. They're not tackling the out of it. We pressured the out of them for those early goals. They weren't doing that. They were literally being handed to it from our late.
And then he got cut off.
Pretty remarkable, given that assessment of the game that we only lost by 2 points. It's quite heady stuff. It is believable. That's what I said. You can't magic up fitness. It's not like you can suddenly go, we're not fit one week. Oh, well, we're going to flick some switch the next week. So on top of all of those stuff that George has said in terms of the injury, like Benny, we're relying on young players because Benny Brown's not been able to play exactly as George said, Billings and, less so Billings because he's been available, but McAdam had an interrupted season. Petty had an interrupted season. Oliver had an interrupted pre-season. Even T-Mac had an interrupted pre-season. If you might recall, he got selected a week after having his foot surgery or 2 weeks after at the beginning of the season, and he's looking like he's flagging. Maxi's coming off an injury. And, young players in their first and second season, it just literally aren't able to get to the level that senior players are. It's not a magic formula. And so we're always behind the 8 ball, and you never quite know how far because we can't see into the program, obviously, but it's clear that you can see the way other teams are playing us. They're looking to exploit that aspect of our game. So, it's just is as it is. It's not like a weakness. It's not like a character weakness of the players that they're not able to be, Clary's a really good example, is that he's at the fitness as best he can and he's working as hard as he can. But it's not a weakness that he falls away in the last quarter. It's a reality. It's a function of his interrupted preseason. And the other thing that I was thinking about too is that I think we really underestimate the impact of in-season injury. Lever had what was his injury? It was
a knee.
A knee. So he took weeks to come out the other side of that. May had his ribs broken, took weeks to come outside of that. And I'm not sure about you guys. 𝗟𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗃 had his best preseason for ages, and he was brilliant in that game. Was it when he did his shoulder? Was the Swans game?
Swans' very first game, yep.
He was enormous in that game until he did his shoulder. When he got smacked, then it was dislocated, and he's never been the same player since. Salo's never got a run at it this season, and there's even Disco's was coming off a pretty significant. He was out for 6 or 7 weeks with injury as well, wasn't he?
Cracked pelvis.
Cracked pelvis,
so
and I'm probably missing 3 or 4.
Yeah.
With Colt's out with concussion, so that has an impact the entire season. I remember a few years ago, Jones, it became apparent after the season, there's a question about this, that he played the whole season with a broken neck. And it only became evident. And everyone, I remember on the podcast, the discussion was, what's up with Jones? He's not playing to his normal level. And it turns out after the season that he has a busted neck all season.
Well, that was for carrying the whole team for a number of years. So I'm not surprised. George, anything you want to add on the fitness? That was praise again. It's the George podcast.
Dan's not related to me in any way, so but it sounded like he was the running his fitness regime while he was asking the questions there. So maybe we need to get him down to training and help the guys out.
I think we all need it. All right, let's. George, you wanted me to include the two. The centre bouncers and the bad bouncing together. So I'll read all those questions out. Lazy asks, what on earth was going on with our setup at centre bouncers in the last quarter? Often Max would tap to the front and we'd have 2 mids on the backside. GWS 8 clearances to 0 in the last. Is this down to coaching? Ross Millen asks, can we have a discussion about centre clearances? I concede that there are nuances around centre clearances that mean winning every clearance isn't necessary, especially if the opposition kicks dirty ball in that we can intercept and slingshot from. But I don't think it's any coincidence that the first quarter saw us win some centre clearance, get territory, and then lock it in with pressure resulting in a fairly dominant quarter. After the first quarter, the Giants were able to get on top in the middle. This is a repeat pattern that opposition is winning clearances but are getting cleaner entries that we would like, putting our defence under way too much pressure. I can concede that we have had injuries, but we have the premier ruckman in the comp and our midfield cattle is good. Is this an 𝗟𝗍𝗀 versus McQualter thing, or what is going on in the centre clearances? And responding to Ross Millen's questions, 𝗍𝗀𝗀𝗁 and McQualter, Monocular says, great question. Clearances weren't great under Adam either, but this also raises a serious question. What is McQualter's real role and what changes has he instituted to improve our performances? And just quickly before I talk about that, so I've got something I want to say about that. Alex, no fancy name, says, first-time caller, etc. At the game for the first time this year, I was really struck by the number of poor bouncers at the centre square. I don't know if there are stats, but I felt like well over half the bouncers were called. This seemed more a case in the final quarter. One, it felt like Max expended a fair amount of energy chasing rucks that were recalled. And two, the subsequent ball-up throw-ins were pretty low and went straight to a ground ball. Both of these elements would, in my opinion, bias a team with a dominant ruck, especially with Clayton out on his feet. But anyone who bags his effort needs to take a good hard look. It's not a conspiracy theory, but I felt it really played against us on the night. So just going back to the McQualter thing, I think it's interesting that this is the first week that our new midfield assistant, Andrew McQualter's name's come up in questions on this podcast. I've wanted to sort of be able to place blame on someone, and perhaps that someone is the midfield coach. However, as we just discussed, if you have a look at the hand that McQualter was dealt just in the pre-season, it starts with the issues surrounding Clayton Oliver. And I think when that broke, that whole Clayton Oliver thing sort of came out. That was McQualter's first day on the job. And then on the eve of the season, with the medical retirement of Bangus Brayshaw, both of those situations threw a giant spanner. It threw a huge spanner into the works and all the planning that the staff would have done in regards to our midfield, whose depth was already going to be challenged, given that we traded out Grundy, Jordan, Harms, Dunstan retired. Halfway through the season, track goes down, and also the Salem issues. You can't expect a midfield. You can't expect a midfield without track, Brayshaw, Salem, and underdone Clary to be the Rolls Royce that we come to expect. So for now, I think McQualter does get a bit of I got some question marks on him, but he hasn't been dealt the best hand yet. So I think we'll have to see what happens next year. I think in regards to that, Big Man, what do you make of our work in the middle against the Giants? And if you perhaps want to touch on any Uze McQualter comparisons to their styles.
I think they're really genuine points. I think one of the interesting ones is Salem, because Salem was going to come in and be the player who sort of covered a little bit for our loss of Gus. And so early days, he was out injured the week after Bowie, or even Bowie, even the same game. And so he missed big chunks and has only been back in the midfield a handful of times. So I think that's a really good point.
He also had thyroid issues in the pre-season, didn't he, this year?
He also had thyroid.
So he didn't have a full
another
pre-season.
Interrupted pre-season. And the other one that's, for all of the criticism of Oliver, which I think is just really unfair. I mean, he's still our best mid. There's no question about it. And he's probably top 20 in the AFL for, almost all of the key metrics for midfielders. But Viney's dropped off a little bit in the last little bit. And what was interesting is that he's almost always in the top 5 pressure players and wasn't this week. So he was tagged, though, in this game, which I thought was really interesting. It was a good move to tag him. So if you're listening, Pearl, just close your ears a little bit, because it's really interesting looking at the statistics for the centre field. So if without looking at the data, and of course the AFL coaches, this is what they do. They look at the data for an informed decision. The feeling is, we were smashed once again at stoppages. And part of that is the recency bias of those 4 goals in that last quarter. But so 2 sort of data points that were really interesting is that they only scored 2 goals, 1 from centre bounces. So, in fact, they didn't score 4 goals at the end of the game. I fully take the point about the territory, but they only scored 13 points in this game from centre bounces. So there was 2-1-13. What was, and this goes to your point, I think more so about what they scored, but we didn't score a point from centre bounces. And I don't reckon, I couldn't believe it when I'm looking at it now. It's 3 bagels. I reckon that there's a good chance that has never happened under Goody, because it's remarkable not to score a single point from a centre bounce. And around the ground stoppages, they were only +5. So they were +18, so 3 goals from stoppages. A huge part of that is because we didn't score anything from centre bounces. I mean, can you recall a time when we haven't got a single point from a centre bounce?
I don't really follow those stats that closely, but
I mean, to put it in context, is that we only average 9.5, but we also only concede 7.6 points. So, scores these days from centre bouncers aren't that huge. Like that would be fairly sort of common across the AFL, those sorts of numbers, but not to score a single point from a centre bounce. For me, that speaks to the setups. Like, regardless of who's in there, that speaks to the setups. And just on that last setup, this is where, I don't know if this is a 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀 decision, and I'd love to interview them at off season and talk about this a little bit, ask these questions, or if it's a Goody decision. But it seemed to me that the smart move in that last quarter, what was curious is they took Rivers out of the centre, so you lost a bit of breakaway speed. I would have thought a play would have been to bring 𝗍𝗲𝗄𝗃 into that very last bounce, because that setup where they hit, I couldn't believe it. We're watching on the wing. There was no one on the offensive side, and this is probably on Oliver, but this is probably maybe not a fair criticism of Oliver, because he was standing off green, but perhaps hoping to be hit to him. So he was in space and collected, not on top of, with green on top of him, but Maxi hit it clear into space. And Oliver, who's lost his breakaway pace this year, was already at 2 steps behind Green, and Green collected it, and had time to turn and get it inside their 50, and that was game over. But if it was 𝗍𝗲𝗄𝗃 might have beaten, and the play was to hit it into space. 𝗍𝗲𝗄𝗃 might have, with his leg speed, might have been able to get to that ball first and then win a clearance. So, but not 0 points from centre clearances is on 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀, I think, or is on those setups, because regardless of who our mids are. So, I think it's a good question, Andy. It's a good sort of discussion, because it probably puts the blame more squarely where it needs to go, rather than just saying, the mids aren't any good. But your other point's an excellent one too, is you take the quality of mids that you just mentioned, track Oliver playing at 75% and Gus. That's out 3 of our starting midfielders for the last 2 years.
George?
Oh, yeah.
On that?
There's a fair bit to unpack here, and look, our quality midfielders are just not there, so that's quite simple. Neither were theirs. They were missing Coniglio and Kelly.
Yeah.
They had Toby Bedford playing in the midfield for the whole game.
He was on 𝗍𝗍𝗀. He wore him like a blanket.
But yeah, so it was almost like, second rate for both sides being played in the middle. But I was absolutely appalled with the setup that we were playing with it. First thing was, whether it was through them doing it or us not responding to it, we were playing 5 metres back from the centre circle, all our midfielders. That created space for them to be able to move into. So Max was hitting the ball into the space, and guess what? There are people like Whitfield and Peatling are much, much faster than 𝗍𝗀𝗀𝗀 and much faster than Oliver. Just a fact of life. And they exposed us with the tactics, and exposed us with their speed. We've talked about the speed before. I think 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 has to wear that, simply because Goody was in hospital for 3 days. All the planning was on the assistant coaches, and they've come out with that. And you sort of you've just got to wear it. In the last one, as Bin Man said, why wasn't 𝗍𝗲𝗄𝗃 in, particularly at that last bounce,
or Rivers,
or anybody? Clary was obviously shot. Absolutely, he had 3 touches for the last quarter. He's absolutely shot. You've got to get some run in it. The game's on the line, and what do? You put Clary back in there, and he just can't move. He's played his guts out. We've talked about the other problems. So Max was also shot come the end of it. So
he was monstered physically in the end. He couldn't get up off the ground. And
and the other thing that as was alluded to in one of our listeners was the umpires absolutely gave away trying to bounce the ball. There were second-rate umpires who could not bounce the ball. they had so many recalls that they just gave up and started throwing the ball up in the air. Well, that played exactly into Briggs's hands.
Exactly.
Because he just grapples, and as we've seen, from round one with Grundy, if you grapple against Max, you deny his height advantage and his ability to palm the ball to where he wants to go. So,
and Maxi clearly didn't have the sort of strength to push back against him. With
I don't think anybody would. He is an absolute monster of a ruckman. The other interesting thing, I thought the Giants really planned well about how to utilise their midfielders best. I noticed when they were in defence, they always took an extra man to the ball, to the contest. So where most teams, including us, will play the extra man in defence as a defender, they were playing it as an extra person around the ball. So they denied you getting the ball out, and so they repel the attacks that way. So it was an interesting concept, especially when we've got a depleted midfield. That was a way of ensuring that we didn't score as often as we could have. So yeah, it was a really, really poor effort, I think, from the planning perspective. We've just got to face the reality that we haven't got our quality mids playing. We've got a lot of players who are not fit for whatever reason. And when you come up against a team that is fit, and the other thing that people conveniently forget is the Giants are very talented. They are really skilled. They are great kicks. They expose you in a big way, and they did in this game. Give them the opportunity. They expose you, and then you've got people like then you've got a Hogan sitting up in the forward line taking marks, and with good kicking technique, he scores goals.
Exactly. And that question before about like us finishing off games, I would argue a huge part of it is our skill level. Like it's been an issue, but again, you take out your quality players, that's always going to expose it. But like I've been talking about forever and a day is that we aren't a good kicking side. And Giants have built their sort of list over a long time and emphasised good kicking. They've got a much stronger emphasis on the contest now, but the bottom line, they've got some excellent kicks, and, Jesse's kicks didn't look like missing, did they? He looks hilarious with his stutter. Just sort of on that point about where to sheet home some of the responsibility, I think it's a really good point. I completely forgot about Goody being in hospital for 3 days. It's almost like a Greek drama, isn't it? Like in terms of what we've had to put up with this season, some of this, that we've had. The only thing we're missing is a plague in terms of some of our luck. But in terms of sort of the responsibility on McWalter and the midfield setup, it's really worth noting that our highest rated player, his predicted rating for this game was 11.2, and his game was, this shocked me, it really surprised me, Jack Viney, he was our highest rated player, 18.3 for this game. Only one player on the ground had a higher rating than he didn't get a coach's vote either, Jack. Only one player on the ground had a higher rating than Jack Viney, and that was Brent Daniels, another player, those mid-sized forwards that we struggle with. And Max Gawn, so our top 6 players were Jack Viney, top-rated players, Jack Viney, Stephen May, Cade Chandler, and Max Gawn, 16.5. So, he had way higher rating than Briggs, for instance, was 14. So I was really amazed that, even with his injury, it really showed, but he still had an incredible game, and what an effort for him to play in that game when he was clearly and to that level. His predicted rating for that game was 15.2, and he played above it, which is really remarkable. And Chandler, whose effort for the whole game was exemplary, I thought his predicted rating in this game was 8.3 and it was 17.2, so more than double, and almost the same for Stephen May, whose predicted rating was 9.6, and he had a great game, 17.6. But even Stephen May, I don't know what you guys think, he again, another game where he looked like he struggled to pick up the ground ball.
I think he struggled for a long time doing that.
Most of his career.
Well, it just sort of seems to be some weeks he just really can't get down to that. And he just, my heart's in my mouth every time he kicks those short kicks.
Yep. Just kick it long.
Kick it long. Eh? That should be a pretty rule. You can kick 60 metres or don't kick.
Yep.
And Ed Langdon, he's got to get away from the boundary in terms of where he's kicking.
His kicking is
I saw
Ed
a
on the
stat.
full Langdon.
He's kicked the most out on the fulls for the entire AFL this year, and that was the stat I saw a couple of weeks ago. So certainly hasn't improved.
I'll give Ed a lot of credits because he gets the
Yes,
ball where
no.
others do not. There was a classic case on the wing where he beat 2 players to get the ball.
I'm not bagging. I'm just bagging those kicks.
Even if he kicks it out of bounds after that, well, that's great. Fine.
Having said that, one of them, I can't recall the timing, but one of them was a really critical stage of the match, and we had the ball, and it was like, oh no, Ed.
Yeah,
you can't knock someone who runs the distance as he runs, though, can you?
Just on those centre bounces by the umpires, I thought they were absolutely appalling, and I'm a big proponent of getting rid of the bounce, and if we must keep them for tradition, then perhaps just at the beginning of each quarter, but really, why bother? The AFL's really got no problem with gutting everything else out of the game, so why not that as well? And if the conditions don't suit the bounce, like they obviously didn't suit the bounce, for bounces on Saturday night, and it was proven time and time again, then for F's sake, just throw it up.
Or
none of them could do it.
Yeah, at least give it to the umpire who can bounce the ball.
I saw 3 different umpires at least, because I checked the number. They've got the number was right in front of me every time. It was a different guy every time. So I don't know. I definitely saw 3 different numbers.
But some umpires can do it and others can't. We
the
managed to
3
get
of them
3
at
who
least
couldn't in this game.
Maybe it was a 4th as well.
Raise the classic example. He cannot bounce. So don't give it to him ever.
But you make a really good point, George, about the way that benefited Briggs, because he was able to use his one wood, which is his strength as a big fella.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk some more about the umpiring. You've covered it a little bit, so we might not have to talk too much about
cover it, Andy. Not even close.
All right, well, here you go. There's a Bin Man mini rant coming up. A mini, or it could be a maxi. From poor bounces to poor adjudication, Logs asks us to please comment on the umpiring. That's all he said. Stinger says, Green ducking, the blatant push to May, Toby overstepping the mark to intercept McDonald, all resulted in goals. Just take one of them out, umps. I'm not asking for perfection, just one, and we bloody win. Red Jacket adds, you could also add the one where Tom Green was clearly in the 5-metre protected area when Petty marked on 50, would have been a certain goal. Spirit of Norm Smith posted a tweet from the AFL showcasing Daniel's crumbing goal in the last quarter where Stephen May's clearly shoved in the back by Riccardi and wants us to discuss it. Wells 11 replies to that post saying, I still can't look at that without wanting to frickin' shout. That's just so blatant, it's ridiculous. Turner was pinged at the other end for far less. One day soon, a decision like that's going to affect a grand final result against a big club, and then watch the charges roll out. So, B-Man, rant away.
Well, as I said at the top, I cannot remember the last time I was so livid angry, and maybe it was the sort of the consequences of it. Just taking that point about one day grand final will be decided, that may be the case. But to me, that question highlights the key issue here, is that everyone who's furious about that game, the umpiring standard in that game, and 100% one of them, should turn that anger to where it deserves to go, and it's the bloody AFL. It's a joke. It's just been a joke. It's like it was a better umpired game 20 years ago. It was a better umpired game in the 80s. It was a better umpired game in the 70s when you had an umpire who, like in basketball, where the umpire controlled the game almost from like a respect perspective, and they had a style and an approach. It is an elite multi-billion-dollar sport that we have amateurs who are umpiring, and I do not blame them one little bit. And the point I wanted to make about the grand final is the reason why we don't see decisions like that made in grand final is because the best umpires umpire in the grand final. Every single game of football should be held by that standard. Every single game of football. And I could not believe it when I heard 2 things that blew my mind this year. Is it Dylan, or was it Dylan and the umpiring coach, whoever that is, saying it's never been umpiring better or there's no issue. That is just the AFL not listening to fans. Where is the obligation for the AFL, the stewards of the game, to hear what fans are saying about this sport and get their shit together and deal with it? Because how many games this season could we realistically point to that the Melbourne's result has been at the very least influenced by appalling umpiring? In this game, I have no clue even who the name of the umpires were, and I do not blame them, but they were not up for the job. This is a serious sport. As I said, there's hundreds of thousands of people who follow it passionately. There's people like us who go along to games when it's sub-zero and turn up week in, week out and spend our hard-earned money on it. The AFL have got no interest in doing something about umpiring because they want all the angst. They want the whole week is full of fodder about people complaining about the umpires. And as I said before the show, they are the employers, and they are quite happy to hang their umpires out to dry and let them cop it, and then have the cheek to tell the footy media, the footy fans public to not criticise them, to say coaches don't criticise them. I know you can't criticise them. Well, I'm not criticising the umpires. I'm criticising the AFL. It is pathetic. And it's not the free kicks that are given. It's the ones that aren't given, like that Steve May one. But there were at least 5. They go through this whole ridiculous pantomime in the beginning of the season with the holding the ball, changing interpretation. Not one game Melbourne's played where that's been adequately umpired. In this game, I reckon, without exaggeration, there were at least 5 free kicks holding the ball that we should have got that were not paid. It was just extraordinary. And for me, the whole game was summed up by that ridiculous, mind-blowing decision to give it's not deliberate, of failing to whatever it is.
Insufficient intent against McVeigh when McVeigh didn't even touch the ball. It came off the boot of Green, and I could see it live from the second row of the MCG. I could see it live that it came off his boot, and the guy standing right in front of him. They only kicked a point, but imagine if they'd kicked a goal. I would have run onto the ground and my head would have exploded. I could not believe it. I'm laughing just because someone in Big Man's household closed the door behind him during that rant.
It is just not good enough. It is so infuriating, and the AFL won't even allow a mature conversation. They won't even talk about addressing this issue. Their best effort is to say, no, there is no issue. The other thing that blew my mind this season was it seems to be an accepted fact that one of the drivers of the fourth umpire is not to improve the umpiring. It is to make sure that the most experienced umpires don't have to run as far so that they can umpire more games. I mean, that's a blatant admission that the sport is not adequately umpired, and it's their job to do it. Stop wasting money on ridiculous things like score reviews and bloody censors in the Sharon and all of that nonsense, and pour it into improving the standard of the umpiring. It's just not good enough. And I was so furious at the footy. I'm still so furious, obviously. It felt like it ruined the experience of the game, and it is just so mind-numbingly infuriating. That's it. That's my mini rant.
George, anything you want to rant about? George, anything you want to add to that rant?
No, I agree with the thesis. It basically comes down to the AFL, and it's when you've got part-time or amateur umpires umpiring a professional sport, you get what you pay for. The old adage about if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, and that's what we've got in this particular case. It's really disappointing that, and it was very obvious in this game, the umpires did not know how to position themselves correctly. You'll have 2 umpires 5 metres apart instead of putting themselves in the right spots. Even the boundary umpires are out of position in all the games, not just in our games. It's across all games. And the other thing that all the fans find really, really annoying is the rule changes, not the interpretation. It's not the rule changes. The rules haven't changed for years. The interpretations that, what happened to the holding the ball interpretation that was meant to be changed? What happened to the dissent interpretation that was meant to be changed? What happened to the infringing the protected area calls? What happened to it just goes on and on and on. How about
what about the 15 metres? 2 weeks ago, a week ago, the rule of the week was...
Yeah, that was my next one, 15 metres. Yeah, it's annoying for the fans, but the more and more I'm coming around to Bin Man's point of view is that they just want to create angst and
they've succeeded.
and in the media because it puts them on the front page. And we will have games decided by poor umpiring decisions. Because as Bin Man said, you've got to put the resources into training them properly. You've got to treat them as professionals, and you'll get the results.
Yeah, and look, I'm strong on this, is they don't even have to spend any more money. The top umpires get paid a decent whack, but they're all professionals. And the AFL won't even have what mechanism is there for fans to actually address this issue? Since, the AFL Commission, I can understand why they went to the Commission and took the power away from the clubs when the Commission was formed. But what that did was took away any opportunity for fans to influence the shape of the game. I mean, there is where's the outlet to say, hold on, this isn't good enough. This is our game. This is not the AFL Dylan or the AFL administration's game or the Commission. It's the fans' game. And they're ruining it. They're absolutely ruining it. And the thing that drives me nuts is the blatant inconsistency. So to see Petty not get that free kick when it was such an obvious free kick after the 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗁𝘀𝗁 one, where they didn't even say where the mark was, and he ran over it and gave 50 metres. I know they're in two separate games, but it's just so mind-numbing, the inconsistency, and it's just ruining lots of people's enjoyment of the sport.
Lefty says, our disposal efficiency in this game was just putrid. Our handling of the ball, possibly due to the conditions, was also subpar. After the first quarter, I thought the Giants adjusted to the conditions much better than we did. They handled the ball better, knocked it better, and used it quickly and efficiently. We just could not handle the ball well, and when we did, we could not move it on quickly and slow played and either kick to a contest or directly to an opposition player. Whenever we tried to move it quickly, it was as if the ball was made of soap, and we simply made terrible decisions. It's very frustrating. We've also got a voicemail from another unknown caller.
Good evening, gentlemen. First time caller, long time listener. Could you please discuss the following? Are we skillful enough to execute Simon Goodwin's plan? Thank you. Love listening to you. Keep up the good work. Thanks, bye.
So to answer Lefty's question, which was the first one, once our pressure dropped after quarter time, I also thought the GWS handled the ball better than us. The disposal efficiency for the game, the Giants, 74%. They outshone the D's at 66%, reflecting their superior ball use. And scoring accuracy, the Giants 65% versus the D's 52% in front of goal. And that, I guess, highlights the Giants' clinical finishing. George, what do you think of our disposal on the night, and in particular our handling of the conditions versus theirs? And also perhaps you could answer our unknown callers' questions of whether we're skillful enough to execute Goody's game plan.
No.
There you go.
There's a simple answer. Thanks for that. Look, as Bin Man's mentioned, I'm the same. We do not have enough skilled kicks in particular. It exposes us, that causes turnovers. In a team with like the Giants, you have got an absolutely first-class rate number of players. They've been gifted top-end draft picks for years and years, and it shows. Those are the quality players that you need, and they've got them all over the ground. People might laugh at Jesse Hogan with his little stuttering kicks as he goes into goals, but he doesn't miss. People don't notice Whitfield, who collects 30 possessions and every single one of them hits someone on the chest. It's not surprising. I think the conditions dried out a little bit from what compared to the start of the game, and the Giants just got better and better as a result of not having to worry about damp conditions. At least it just shows how good they are. If that game was played in completely dry conditions, the Giants would have won by 10 goals.
No, I'm not sure about that. I mean, we did kick 5 goals. Like, we were dominant in the first quarter. We blew them off the park. So, yeah, I'm not sure I come at that. But your point's a good one about their quality and just on quality. I mean, Hogan, he's had a just enormously good season. I've watched a fair bit of the Giants, and he's one of my all-time favourite D's players, as I said. But his marking's great, his positioning's great, and he takes his chances. But the equivalent player in their team to track, and they're really, really good comparisons, both in terms of who their best player is, most dynamic player, is you took the Toby Green out of this team and we win that game of football, no question in my mind. And he wasn't, I mean, Daniels was their best player in the player ratings, but Toby Green was their second best, and he is such a good player. Like, I mean, leaving aside the Melbourne aspect, some of his ability to win one-on-one contests. McVie, I thought, played his guts out and was on him for most of the night, and he did not lower his colours. He did everything he could, but he is just one seriously good footballer, one of the most purest, best footballers I can ever recall seeing, Toby Green. And he was a big difference maker in this game. Just looking at his numbers, it's a pretty consistent game of footy, only 14 kicks in the end. He only had 16 disposals, but he hurt with each of them. And it's that impact, it's just that sort of player in the front half that, he's a difference maker. So
got an armchair ride from the umpires as well in this game.
Well, yeah, including that free kicks. And just looking at that number, by the way, Jack Viney is the player directly above him for ratings, and this is an amazing number. Jack Viney had 15 contested possessions of his 23 disposals. He had 15 contested possessions. They're not all of his disposals, and he had 14 ground ball gets. The next player on the ground was that Peatling fella who had 13, but 14, Jack Viney, ground ball gets. And the next on the list was Clayton Oliver with 11. There were a bunch of them, Tom Green, Finn Callahan and Ward. So, our mids sort of, you can't say that they didn't stand up. They did their work.
All right. Let's move on. My D says there were supposedly rumours about May and Lever being injured prior to the game. Does the panel think we've got any players carrying injuries into games circa 2022 other than perhaps Max Gawn? It seems to be a part of the season where so many players are carrying niggles or injuries they can play through but must remedy at the close of the season. Bigfoot adds, I'm not convinced Max was 100% fit. We obviously rushed him back due to the predicament that we find ourselves in, but Max clearly was not over his injury, and it showed. And I guess players carrying injuries this late into the season is part and parcel of the game, and given our need to win every game, resting any of them is not really an option. B-Man, your thoughts on any players carrying an injury? And I guess we already know that Max wasn't 100%.
Yeah, which just again shows, one, how enormous, what sort of heart that fella's got for playing, but also to the level he played at. Like, he was phenomenal given his injury. I thought Maisie, I have no idea whether, I just read on Demonland that there was some talk about, but May and Lever, but he did look to struggle to pick up the ball. Bowie's an interesting one. Like, he was the second lowest rated player on the ground, 1.7. So, and he just hasn't looked the same player. I've never played footy at that level, but like, how do you ever sort of fully recover from some of those really heavy contact injuries in season? I think back to Langer's, how long did it take for him to get back to his best footy after having his ribs all smashed up? So there's no doubt we're carrying, there's always players. And I think the other thing is, George noted before about how many injuries we've got. We're having players who probably might get rested. There was talk early on, for instance, that we would rest and manage Windsor. Well, we haven't had that opportunity to do that. So there is probably no doubt some players, struggling. I mean, one of which, again, I think Clary, it's easy to forget he had hand surgery, and I don't reckon his hand is right still. He still looks like he's favouring, he's not instinctively one-touching the way he does. So I've no doubt that he's struggled to come up since his hand surgery. By all accounts, it was a pretty bad injury. They got him back in the side partly, from my understanding, to make sure that keep his routines. And, part of his trouble last year was struggling to rehab by himself or whatever. So yes, I suspect there's more than a handful of players. There's a handful of players carrying niggles. I mean, as you said, there always is in any team, but Maxi was definitely one of them.
I noticed T-Mac was wearing a glove in this
game
as well. Was another unusual one.
So that must be an injury, you'd think.
You'd think so.
He never wears one otherwise, does he?
No.
He didn't wear one in the wet game against the Bombers.
Yeah, and I hope Fritsch is carrying an injury of some sort.
Yeah.
because he's not putting in very much.
There was some couple of efforts that weren't quite stellar.
No tackles again this week.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about 𝗟𝗏. Singer says, as always, thank you to our intrepid hosts for bringing us this podcast week in, week out. Although, Andy, you can go back on holidays. We were unstoppable against some of the competition's best while you were on your junket, and now have crashed down to earth upon your return. In all seriousness, welcome back. And welcome back to 𝗟𝗏. So good to see him tearing it up on the G. I just wish he had his partner in crime, Petrarca, by his side. Would certainly have made a difference on Saturday night. It was fantastic that he could shut out all the noise from the bleating media about him being on the trade table. I can't wait until the trade week silly season is over and we can put this nonsense to bed. Hopefully with a full preseason under his belt and his life back to some normalcy, he will be tearing it up more consistently next season. So, George, your thoughts on 𝗟𝗏's game? We've spoken about it a bit, and if you want to comment on the whole trade rumours at all.
No, not on the trade rumours. No, this was a great return for 𝗟𝗏. He's obviously, it's a prime example, and been men spoken about, and we've spoken about it with all sorts of players. He is a prime example of no preseason, you're going to struggle during the season. He was completely cooked at the certainly in the last quarter, and the end result was probably partially due to the fact that he couldn't get his hands on the ball with only 3 touches. But it was 𝗟𝗏 at his best prior to that. I think it was 550 metres gained, the highest for certainly our side in that game. He just ran out of puff, and the other thing is he's doing it all on his own. He's got Jack Viney to help him out, but with no Petrarca or a Brayshaw there, he's doing it all on his own effectively. So he's carrying the load when he's probably not in his best physical condition. So it was a great effort by him. He's certainly, I think Binman's right as well. He's not using his hands as much as previously, and these hands were a real weapon. He's certainly kicking the ball a lot more, which we certainly need to be able to get the ball
for territory.
Territory. Because we've got so few other options to gain that territory out of the middle in particular. But yeah, his was a fantastic effort in this game.
And he's been playing 72% game time this year, which is the lowest of any regular starting 22, and that's clearly related to his conditioning. And I think it's well worth questioning, the sort of logic of having him in that final bounce, or even maybe spelling him at the beginning of that last quarter and putting Rivers and 𝗍𝗏 in there, or that. Like he was struggling, as you said. I think, didn't you say he only had 3 possessions in that last quarter? The other thing that, speaking of the umpires, that drives me nuts is like he gets pinged all the time, 𝗟𝗏. Like he must have been mouthy at some point with umpires, because it's beyond a joke how often he gets pinged for that flip he does. But then all players do that. No one else seems to get pinged for that sort of half handball, half throw off the ground. And he just doesn't he never seems to get any soft free kicks going his way. I think hopefully good preseason. I think there's so many positives about him this year, and I think the club really deserves a huge amount of credit for helping him get back to playing. Or he's played how many games he's missed? Just 2, and that's from his hand surgery. Or was it only 1?
I think he only missed 1 in the end.
Yeah, really, like the guy deserves a huge amount of credit. And again, perspective is important. If you weren't comparing 𝗟𝗏 to his best, and you were just comparing him to, say, Sparrow, or like another sort of mid-range mid, you'd go, well, this guy plays all right. But it was great to see him in that first quarter, like you said, George, somewhere near his best.
Mandalorian says, we haven't had many opportunities to see Laurie play a full game in the midfield. How did you rate his performance, particularly as a replacement to Sparrow? Do you think he will hold his spot on the back of this game and Sparrow's 30 disposal performance for Casey? Big man, how do you rate Laurie's performance, and do you think he'll hold his spot this week against a star-studded Dogs midfield?
Just on Sparrow, I thought it was really interesting that he got dropped. Obviously, he didn't play a role that he was given. I'm assuming in the previous week, it was one of the comments that Goody made about the stoppages, but he went back and did what every good player should do when they go back to VFL level. And I watched that game, and he was amazing in that first half, 20 possessions. So, but on Laurie, I've said this before, and I said it at the end of last year, is for whatever reason I think I've got a bit of a sort of confirmation bias against him. And it's interesting. I've forgotten, because I never even think of Spargo, George, but like he is a big out because he's exactly the sort of player in this game that can make a real difference. So I was a bit down on Laurie watching the game, in part because he missed what seemed to me 2 gilt edge opportunities to hit a target inside 50 under not a huge amount of pressure. So, I was pretty quick to go, Laurie or whatever. But again, the sort of look away the pearl. Again, I think it's really helpful to sort of, in the cool light of day, look at the numbers. He had 6 score involvements, which was the equal most for us with Jack Viney. Just an interesting one on score involvements is Kieran Briggs had 9, Toby Green had 9, Toby Bedford had 8, Brett Daniels had 8, and the fella that George mentioned before, Lockie Whitfield, had 6. So Laurie was the next. So 1, 2, 3, 4. The top 5 score involvements were all Giants, and our next one was Bill Laurie. So, his game was a lot better than, from the data that than I expected it to, but he only went by 63% disposal efficiency. And I said to my mate, he's one wood really. He was recruited with Bowie at the same time, and it was his kicking ability was the big scout on him. But having said that, he had 10 contested possessions, 9 ground ball gets. He was 21% of the time inside. I was really happy that they gave him a good crack in the middle. I thought that was a big mistake last year, not running him through the middle in the game against Collingwood in the finals. He had 3 clearances, which is, it's not too bad. 19 disposals in the end. But his predicted player rating was 4.8, and he was one of, I think he was our 5th or 6th highest rated player, 11.7. So, a pretty solid game, and he deserves to stay in. What do you guys reckon?
Yeah, Andy, you go.
Don't really have many options. I think Sparrow might come back in based on his stats, but
I'd keep him in, and I fully agree with George. Is for me the weak link in the team. No, that's probably unfair, but I don't rate 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀 super high in terms of. I don't think he sort of fits down half back, and so I think he'll come out before Laurie.
Well, they've chosen him to replace Salem, and I guess that's over Howes, who was sort of playing in that halfback role earlier in the season. Slightly different role, but
I think there'll be an easier removal. That's Billings.
We'll talk changes a bit.
Yeah, we'll change it, but Laurie stays in because, as Andy said, we've got no other options coming through. It's I'd wish they'd played him more in the midfield. They played him in this game. They played him an awful lot on the half forward flank, and for at periods there he was standing against Himmelberg, and again you go, what are the assistant coaches doing that they're playing Laurie, who's not a tall player, against one of their best defenders, who's a foot and a half bigger than him? Doesn't create many opportunities, and given our need in the middle, and even to give Clary a break in the middle of it at times.
He wasn't in the centre bounce at the end, was he? That very last one, George. That would have been the go, is to put him in there and say, "Look, stand up, young fella." Or
a Kozzie in that, or a Kozzie. But prior to that, Clary was cooked. So is it obvious to us? Yes. Is it obvious to the assistants? Doesn't seem to be.
And the funny thing about Clary is at one point they put him up forward, and even at his best, I'd say that was his area of weaknesses. He really is midfield or bust, isn't he?
Yep.
He just looks he looks out of place in any other position.
Yeah. And the other thing about Laurie is he's going to struggle with this, because if you're a short player and you're playing midfield, you've got to have some other talent. You've got to have something you've got to be a Sam Mitchell type of player. You've really got to stand out.
Well, you've got to nail those inside 50.
And
there were two of them.
Yeah, you've got to be
no pressure on him or limited pressure, and he just got to hit those targets.
Yep, that's exactly right. You've got to have something special.
Speaking of half forwards, a term I haven't heard uttered this year out of your mouth, big man, this year is the high half forward role.
That's because my job here is done. Is now it's mentioned 30 times every time I watch a footy match.
Are we still employing that high half forward role?
Anyone? Of course, Nibbler.
Well, Nibbler's playing a lot in the midfield, so he's not.
Well, we're not playing that much in the midfield.
We used to have him and 𝗟𝗯𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗃. We've mentioned 𝗟𝗯𝗀𝗀𝘀𝘁 a couple of times tonight, and
absolutely they're playing. Well, our two high half forwards are Nibbler and Chandler, but also Sparrow plays a sort of quasi high half forward defensive mid role. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and then of course for a big chunk of time, Langers was playing up forward essentially as a high half forward. So when Nibbler was tagging, so they had to bring Langers up forward to play the high half forward role. But it is a good question, because that's where a lot of your run comes from.
Yeah, I just don't think we're getting enough from that.
Well, 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀's a big loss. I keep forgetting about him, because he is aerobically a lot quicker than he looks, but he's also super fit when he's up and going.
It was an absolute massive mistake playing him in that first game when he wasn't ready. His foot was already, and he also had interrupted preseason as well, which ended up finishing his entire season playing in that first game.
Played in that. That's Harry hindsight at work.
Yeah, he wasn't. Remember, he wasn't fit going into it. And remember, we were saying at the time Billing should have been shouldn't have been the sub. Anyway. Smurf said, thank you, boys, for your efforts on the podcast during this disappointing season. It can't be easy fronting up each week after some of these losses, particularly after the successful home and away seasons of the past 3 years. I'm really loving that from what I've seen from Andy Manise Wakefield. I think we have found a real gem here. I believe he is a Category B rookie. What is his contract status? Does he need to be elevated to the list, or can he remain a rookie? George, do you know what his contract status is, in particular the Category B rookies, as I think he is?
I don't know that he's a Category B, but
I looked
he's certainly
on
rookie.
I looked on the contract, that thread we've got on Demonland, and he is listed there. Whether that's correct.
Well, in that, I trust the Demonland contract list before anybody else, because we keep it up to date. He'll have to be elevated. I think he's out of contract at the end of this year. He's doing what he needs to do. He's a good filler player. He's not going to be a world beater by any stretch, but he's going to be a good filler player. I have a real fear he's got certain elements of frost in him, where he slices through packs and runs brilliantly and then kicks the ball straight to the opposition.
Yeah.
But it's only been a couple of games he's doing that. He certainly seemed to do that a fair bit at 𝗪𝗪. But he'll be a good soldier into the future.
I thought I didn't think he had a great game in this game. I'm not sure if he had Daniels or like who he's playing on, but he's in many ways the perfect sort of example of the challenges of having so many young players in the team, because after 2 or 3 good games, how many times do young players drop off and struggle to come up the next week? And he was one of the players that I mentioned, I think I said, is that he just wasn't, he's quick. That's his probably thing that I really like about him, because we do lack a bit of genuine toe. And he adds that from the halfback flank, I think. And he just I forget the Giants player that he was chasing, but he just couldn't make ground on him. And 2 weeks ago, he was, tearing along. So, it's a big, particularly for a player like Andy Manise Wakefield, who's been at 𝗪𝗪 for, having to play 3 back-to-back games at AFL level after, being used to playing at the Magoo level. I think it's, just an example of the challenge for those young players backing up, which really shows to me how good is Windsor. Already we've got to a point where we're relying on how good he is, which is probably unfair on him, but it says something about his ability.
Track Forever says, I've been watching some of the early games from 2024 this week and hadn't realised how many of inside 50s went through Petrarca. Undoubtedly, he is our most crucial player, and his loss has left a big hole in the team without a real backup. So, B-Man, we won't dwell too much on this about what could have been, but the injury to Track has left a track-sized hole in our midfield as well as an option up forward. We forget about that. Simply can't be replaced.
Well, as I said before, number 1 in the AFL for score involvements. He was top 10 in the Coaches Award, I think, from memory. Maybe he dropped out of it just
We do not have in the top 20, I think, in the Coaches Award, and that was an award we used to dominate.
Yeah,
at least have at least 3 players in there.
As I said, you take Toby Green out of that side, we win that game of footy. That's it in a nutshell. There's no way they win that game without Toby Green. And if we add Petrarca to that game, we win that game. So that just shows how significant it is to lose a player of that ability. And it simply cannot be understated. And, I've taken a while to process him not being in the side and sort of ignored it, been in a bit denial about it. I don't want to be it's like, it's a, by all accounts.
Turned you into MFCSS.
Well, just I hope he comes up from that injury because he's, like the spleen. I read on Demonland, there was a surgeon who wrote there that is that he could have died, or very easily could have died, and that it's not uncommon.
He had a relapse,
with a spleen that bursts.
He had to go back into hospital recently, as in a couple of weeks ago.
We had appendicitis.
Appendicitis on top.
Apparently related to the spleen, though.
Well, there you go. And I heard him on radio.
I don't know that.
2 different things.
No. The trigger for it. No, I know that they're 2 different parts of it. But there was a suggestion is that it's that when a splenectomy can trigger other internal organs issues, that there was a suggestion that it was linked. It wasn't a coincidence that he had an appendicitis so close to his spleen, but it might be a load of bollocks.
That is Demonland.
Yeah. I think it was a surgeon whoever it was said he was a surgeon, so he might have just been random poster.
That was the Demonland medical minute.
I think the interesting thing, there was some puff piece on the Channel 9 News, I think it was, with Petrarca and his nonnas. And they're cooking together.
Yeah, that's a cooking thing.
But in it, he admitted he's lost 5 kilos.
Yeah.
For a player like that, he hasn't lost 5 kilos of fat. He's lost 5 kilos of muscle.
Exactly.
It'll take him ages to get back.
I heard him on Nova late last week. He's just going to be starting running this week.
Yeah.
And then we'll see how he goes. He'll be running / running a bit, walking a bit. So he's starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And they sort of asked, will you be back next year? Yeah, he starts contact, he said. He's still 4 months away from contact.
Yeah.
That just shows how serious that injury was. And
I just, fingers crossed that when that time comes, there's no Angus Brayshaw issues.
I mean, really.
But again, he'll be coming. To even get to November, pre-season, in a condition that he would have been in the previous year is not possible. He's got a lot.
He starts his next pre-season behind the 8 ball, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an athlete, but I used to run a lot, and then when I did my shoulder, when I started again, I was out for 8 weeks. I started from absolute scratch, and it doesn't take long to lose what you had.
No, I broke my finger very badly playing cricket one time, and I never made the test team after that. So it was that was the end of my test journey.
All right, let's get on to the disappointing crowd. Doug Reamer has been on a passionate tear on Demonland about this issue since Saturday night. He asks, where was everyone? 16,000 crowdies, pathetic. maybe we'd get a few more free kicks if the ones whinging on this forum had the nurries to turn up and support the club. We also had a voicemail from Adam from North Brisbane about this very same issue. Adam from Brisbane, here you go.
Hey Andy, George and Bidman, it's Adam calling here from North Brisbane. I've just been listening to Kane and Buck's Pull Your Socks Up segment on SEN this morning, and Kane, who I view as one of the more serious football commentators who's not prone to hyperbole or sensationalism, had the Melbourne supporters in his sights for his Pull Your Socks Up this morning because of the poor showing of 16,000 supporters at the MCG on Saturday night. In all seriousness, though, I kind of feel that maybe the supporters weren't playing their role as well as they should. It was a crucial game, season's on the line. You can't help but feel that maybe there should have been a few more show up, and it certainly might have made a bit of a difference in that final quarter. So I want to know what you guys thought about that. I mean, the players always say what a difference it makes to them when there's a loud and rambunctious crowd. So it was a bit of a disappointing showing at the MCG on Saturday night. Anyway, thanks very much for the show. Hopefully, next couple of weeks we get some better results. Thanks.
So, George, your thoughts on the dismal crowd that we pulled on Saturday night in those very cold conditions?
Yeah, I'd like to remind Kane that when the Port Adelaide were at their worst, they had to cover off whole seats in the ground to disguise the fact that nobody was turning up to their games either. Let's get some reality in this. A couple of weeks ago, Richmond played GWS at 3:20 on a Saturday afternoon. They had 19,000 people turn up for the same game. Richmond supposedly have 100,000 members.
30,000 of them are pets, probably. Though.
Well, they might be, but they didn't turn up either.
Yeah.
So
every man and not his dog,
and not his dog. Yeah. The Olympics are on. I think it was opening ceremony, wasn't it? It was 7 degrees or something ridiculous. It was rain before the game.
It was forecasted to hail as well.
It was
early on.
When people are thinking about, will I go to the footy? You can go, no, I don't think I will tonight. But at the end of the day, we've got 60-odd thousand members supposedly. But we had 1/3 of them turned up. Richmond with 100,000 have only 1/5 of them turned up. But there's no noise about Richmond not turning up. Richmond supporters not turning up. It's just a bit rich. It's not poor conditions for crowds who want to turn up to see football playing against the GWS side who had 50 happy supporters at the end of the game. Yeah, so it's not just us. Hawthorn played GWS in Tasmania and they got 11,000 turned up. It's people commenting on that? No, we're just the bunnies in the targets for cheap journalists, if you call them that.
I mean, I don't. Leaving aside Kane Corns, whatever. I tend to agree though with Doug Reamer. It's like I agree with everything you just said, George. But leaving aside Kane Corns and the club getting criticised for it, because I think that's a complete load of bollocks, and it's just he's the same fellow jumping into Oliver, and I don't actually mind Kane Corns. That sort of clickbait journalism's got its place. Unfortunately, it's what dominates the coverage of AFL football. That's the problem. Not that Kane Corns sort of does that. It's just that's basically 90% of the footy media. But I really do believe that it has an impact on the result, and it could have been the difference in this game. In that North Melbourne game, there were, I think, 22,000, and it felt really pro-Melbourne, and I thought it was a factor in the last little bit of that game when they were coming hard at us. And so, that thread that Doug Reamer started on, there was a fair bit of passion back and forth in that in terms of, so like I'm not into, people can choose to go to the footy or not choose to go to the footy. We're all there, but I actually genuinely think it makes a difference. I mean, as the caller said, is that players consistently say that it makes a difference, and I think it makes a difference with the umpiring too. And particularly if there are poor umpires, the worse the umpires are, the more likely they are to be their decisions to be subconsciously sort of influenced by the crowd. So, all of the reasons you said, George, and I reckon the game must have been close to 2 or 3 degrees when the game actually started. It was pretty cold, but it was. I think the point that the caller made is the spot on one. Is that the season on the line? That's the time that the players need their fans to turn up. And I personally would have loved it if a few more fans turned up and got it stuck into the umpires with me.
Buck Naked says, what I like, the first quarter, the comeback effort, we are still in it with the future entirely in our hands. What I dislike, 2.5 quarters of poor two-way running and efforts. The weather, it was Arctic there, 0 to 8 clearances in the last, the umpiring and losing. We have lost out on playing finals by 0.5% 1 year not long ago. Results are all over the place and we are still in it. We are not our old ruthless selves and can't string 4 quarters together. What do we need to do to turn this ship around? Can we do it this year or will we simply not be good enough? Big Man Buck Naked asked the question, can we do it this year or are we simply not good enough? So what do you say? I know what you're going to say.
I wouldn't frame it like we're not good enough because I just think that's the wrong way of looking at it. Is we've talked all about, it's now, I think it's a given that we're not at the right level conditioning-wise. Remember last year, or in fact on the podcast in 22, I think it was, we talked about after winning the flag in 21 and then 22 with the challenges we had in the back end of the season, that we talked about that idea of, everything's got to go right to win a flag. And that each time you put something in the column of, this is sort of the perspective that I mentioned earlier that I've been reflecting on. And each time you put something in the oh no column, that it's like that sort of straw in the camel's back. And when I sort of started thinking of that and putting our season in perspective, we've talked at length about our interrupted pre-season. As I said, I reckon that golden rule of 90% of players getting to 90% of sessions. We're probably lucky to be 70-70 on that. There's the loss of the 2 players off our list, essentially down to a list of 42. There's having Ben Brown, Marty Hoare, who we brought in to offset some of our youth and to have, he was been out until recently. We've had a huge amount of bad luck. We had all of the palaver with Smith and Clary in the off season. We had our annual bloody ridiculous Mick Warner and attacking the club and attacking Goody in the preseason. That seems to be an annual event every January. We've had, Max Gawn out with 2, with the injury. We've had injury to May, injury to Lever, injury to Clary, injury to Salo. We've had, we've had a lot of bad luck, and then then just each one of them is one thing in the oh no column. Each one of them is a straw that could break the camel's back, and then your bloody Goody in a critical week coming up against the Lions is in hospital for 3 days with an infection. And did you listen to the presser? He was going back to hospital. The question is, so where's your recovery? I couldn't believe it. He was going from the game back to hospital. It's like
that was stated before the game.
Was it?
Yeah, that he was coming out. He'd been in 3 days in hospital, and that he was going back after the game. Yeah,
right. It must have been pretty bloody sick. I mean, he said that this is normal. I've been pretty sick before, but never had to go to hospital and be on a drip for 4 days.
Yeah, it was a severe. Did it say a severe
cellulitis?
Skin? Yeah. That is quite serious.
What's cellulitis?
Well, that's quite serious. Back to medical minute.
We've got surgeons somewhere in Demonland.
It's like 80% of these fans are medical professionals or lawyers. So
it's a common potentially serious bacterial skin infection. The affected skin is swollen and inflamed and is typically painful and warm to the touch. And don't look it up and look at the pictures that I'm looking at because,
Don't Google it. So my point being is that if you accept that almost everything's got to be right to win a flag and that not too many things can go wrong and you're in a spot of bother. Well, we've had so many things go wrong that it's almost comical. So, I don't. So I discount that idea. That's what I find it really burns my bacon. This idea that things are framed like we're soft or we're psychologically weak or we're not. We can't string 4 quarters together because it's psychological. It's just the reality. It's like that's real. Like if you lose a track, if your best players aren't available, if you're down 2, if you're starting 22 right from the get go, you are going to struggle. Every team. It's the same like Collingwood, and as I pointed out, this is the Swans are, suddenly, not the powerful team they was when you take out Papley or 1 or 2, of their best players. Can we turn it around? I live in hope. That's the way I follow footy, and I'm actually more confident that we'll win this week than I was last week. I know that sounds crazy, but it's because I think we're not covering the ground well enough. And the one ground I would pick in the AFL for us to play every single game from now on, if I could, it would be Marvel, because they will not be able to spread and exploit our lack of ability to spread and cover. And we'll turn this into a forward half scrap. If we win it, we're still only 2 points out of the 8. So, I don't think it's a matter of turning the ship around and suddenly a light bulb goes off and we're contending. But if we, let's make the finals and we'll go from there. And as I said, I'm really confident that we'll win this week. Really confident.
All right, well, we'll talk preview in a minute. We're almost there. Going to read a couple out. Not going to discuss them this week. We're going to table them. Monocular says, I note that it is mathematically possible to reach 7th if we keep winning, and if we can get 8 on the trot, it is a premiership cup. But when should we look ahead to 2025 and never again play those who will not take us there, including but not exclusively Billings, McAdam, Fullerton? El Diablo says season 2024.
Can I just say on that, there's no way the club is putting the Q in the rack and not doing everything they can to win every single game for the rest of this season.
Yeah, well, yeah. Blind Freddie can tell you that. El Diablo says season 2024 is done, boys. I think the club would be better served with a high draft pick, top 6, than a place in the top 8, where we'll most likely lose in the first game anyway. The question is, how should we use that pick?
So that's not Blind Freddie then.
No. Jabroni adds, in addition to this question, what type of players should we be targeting during the trade period? Track Forever asks, if you were the list manager, would you look to recruit a young midfielder with our first pick or a tall defender? Demon WA says, I've done a ladder predictor and unfortunately I don't think we'll make the 8 now. I have us missing on percentage. Nevertheless, I still think we're a good side that is primed to play finals for a long time once we get track back and use any cap space on a replacement mid/utility to take Gus's role. What says August is traditionally the month the assistant coaches are told that that they're being recontracted or not. Already David Teague's left the Tigers as he wants to be a ball movement style coach, not a forward line coach. Do you think we will see change to our assistant coaching ranks in 2025? As a corollary to that, how much change is too much? And so I'll just say, while we're still mathematically a chance to make the finals this season, I think it might be premature to talk about focusing on 2025. There's going to be plenty of time to talk about that when we do, and what we do with our draft picks probably sooner rather than later. So let's table that discussion for later in the year and maybe even for next week. We're not going to talk about that now. So 𝗚cie versus GWS in another thrilling contest for these two teams on the weekend. The 𝗚cie Demons fell short by 7 points against the GWS Giants, despite a strong starter maintaining a lead for most of the game. 𝗚cie's inaccuracy in front of goals allowed GWS to stage a dramatic comeback in the final quarter. In the first quarter, 𝗚cie and GWS were level at 2 goals each. Tom Fullerton and Will Varell were instrumental in the ruck and around the ground, with Fullerton opening the scoring for 𝗚cie. In the second quarter, 𝗚cie began to dominate, with captain Mitch White kicking a spectacular goal and Matt Jefferson adding another from a long distance. By halftime, 𝗚cie led by 8 points. In the third term, the Demons extended their lead to 20 points as the rain intensified. 𝗚cie's defence, led by Marty Hoare and Adam Tomlinson, restricted GWS to just 1 goal in each of the second and third quarters. In the last, GWS mounted a stunning comeback, scoring 5 consecutive goals, including Max Grzuski's 5th of the game, to level the scores at 51 each. Callum Brown then kicked a point to put GWS ahead, and they sealed the victory with another goal in the final minute. Tom Sparrow was outstanding with 31 disposals, 9 tackles and 9 clearances. Tom Fullerton contributed significantly with 25 disposals, 16 hitouts, 10 clearances and a goal. Marty Hoare and Adam Tomlinson were strong in defence with 23 and 22 disposals respectively. As always, Mitch White led by example, kicking a goal and gathering 21 disposals. Matt Jefferson showcased some promise with 17 disposals and a goal. I didn't watch the match. Took that from our 𝗙cie from 𝗙cie. Boys, you did watch it?
I did.
I did too, actually.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah, the thing that I really took out of this game was the absolutely appalling kicking for goal. Yeah, I'll just read you this. I was taking the notes during the game. Seston missed from 15 metres. Varel missed from 20 metres and 35 metres. Harvey Nucleus missed from 10 metres. Jefferson missed from 20 metres, 25 metres and 25 metres. Fullerton missed from 15 metres. Kentfield missed from 25 metres. To win the game, all you needed was one or two of those to kick a goal instead, but we had 9 players miss from inside 35 metres.
It was 6, what was 6-15, was it?
Sorry?
Yeah,
what was it?
something like
6-15.
Yeah, 6-15.
Yeah,
and it was just poor. And these were set shots.
Set shots.
These
all
weren't
in a bit bad sort of conditions, but yeah, they were all
easy. Well, there was a couple from the boundary, but most of them were from almost dead in front,
and they took their chances.
That's
football in a nutshell.
𝗟𝗻𝗀𝗀𝗀 or whatever had kicked all of their score up to 3 goals at a time. But he's a good kick for goal. He was kicking straight. We weren't. So what was interesting, Adams was out with a lung injury of some sort.
That was last week in the injury.
No Ben Brown.
No Ben Brown.
Played last game of footy, you reckon?
McAdam is out with something or the other. I don't know what. He wasn't playing. Interestingly, they've moved 𝗟𝗍𝗃 down to defence, probably because, once again, we've got very few other options.
I think more to give some space for Jefferson
and also to they're playing Varel in the ruck, trying to give him more time. So that was good. Noah Uze was playing, which was interesting.
Right.
He's a big kid. He did a few things, but not unexpectedly. He's only 17 or whatever. So he shows some promise. He's much bigger than his father, so that'd be something to really keep an eye on. We're 20 points down, 20 points up going in the last quarter, and managed to completely lose it. So
it was a frustrating. I was like, what the hell am I watching this for?
Yeah. So I don't think there was anything to take from that game.
Well, the one positive I thought. Well, I mean, one thought I had is like, I can see exactly the edge in why there was that edge in Goody's voice the previous week in the presser about the criticism because, again, in a game that really sort of, was important for the ruckman to stand up, Varel and Fullerton, who both played all right, but neither of them imposed themselves as rucks, did they? And I thought it was the best I've seen Jefferson play. So it was a real pity he didn't take his chances because he seems like he's got a pretty good kicking action, but he's, I think he kicked 1.6. Is it something like that? 1.5?
Yeah, something ridiculous. He's just inconsistent at the moment, inconsistent with his work rates as well. One week he like this one, he seemed to
this week.
He was far better.
Yeah.
Previous week, although it was really wet, it was just no second efforts at all, sort of thing. So
if he can do that, if he can get that part of his game and get I thought he took a couple of really good marks, good use of the body. He just let himself down with his kicking. He could have been the match winner in the end, and whatever the 𝗟𝗍𝗃, whatever you name is, he was the match winner.
But he's got like he and Varel. And even Seston show promise, but if you put them up to AFL level, they will get absolutely spanked in a big way. They just haven't got the strength, the endurance, or the game sense at this stage. So there's a lot of development's got to go into those players.
Absolutely.
And when people say, "Oh, we've got to drop this player from the AFL side," we should be dropping Petty. Well, who are you going to replace him with?
Petty had his best game, I thought, for ages. I thought he was terrific.
I'm just using him as an example. When people say, "Oh, well, we should drop, pick someone else in the side," well, who are you going to replace him with? We don't have anybody. The only player who could hold down a position would be
Howes. I reckon Howes will good chance.
Marty Hoare or Tomlinson.
And Howes.
On an as needed basis, but we don't need them.
Well, Howes definitely. I mean, Howes played 8-9 games of AFL footy, so
yeah.
But sort of interesting player for the Giants that I think is well worth us, remembering, and particularly in terms of Jefferson's development. I've seen enough. I think the club's obviously seen enough. They've re-signed him. So, and on that front, the Colt re-signed, didn't he? So now, it's such a great sign for the club and where we're heading, and the sort of the way that, I think it's a huge tick of confidence that Disco's re-signed, Colt's re-signed, Petty's re-signed, and Windsor re-signed during the week as well. That's, if there was any disquiet at the club, you don't put pen to paper at this stage. And
we need Langdon re-signed.
Yeah,
re-signed.
The player that I think is really worth sort of thinking of, in that I didn't even realise he played until I just looked at the numbers before, is Cadman. Cadman was a number 1 draft pick. He's in his 3rd season of footy, I'm right in saying, or is it his 2nd? Yep. It's his 3rd, isn't it? It might be second.
Might be second,
I think.
Second.
So he can't get a bloody kick. I don't know. He won't be in that side if they make finals. So, I think, one, it just shows how far JVR is, and also that you got to give these young players, tall forwards, time to develop. So, still got a lot of confidence that Jefferson will make it. But what you said, I think he just needs to get that effort consistent week in, week out. That's the thing for him.
All right, let's move on. Still early in the week, and we've had no injury report as of yet. No injuries were reported from the match on the night, but that doesn't mean we won't get through the week end unscathed. Colton Tolstrup, who suffered a concussion Sunday week against the Dockers, may be stretching it to be available for Friday night match, which hits day 12 of the concussion protocol. So watch this space. I'm not sure. 12 days, but I don't know. When does it start? When does it finish? I don't know. We'll see. Just getting into changes against the Bulldogs. Red Jacket asks, in terms of personnel available, is there anyone we can bring in at the moment, or is it a case of moving deck chairs on the Titanic, where we're sort of been just speaking about that? Big Man, followed by George, your changes for this week's match against the Doggers, if any.
Well, Colt comes in, doesn't he? If he what did you say? Is he? When's he come out?
Well, it was Sunday weeker, so it was Sunday. I don't know if that's counted as day or Monday's date. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Monday is now. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is
excellent.
12
you
days.
See your fingers there.
Yeah, no one can see that visual meter, but that's 12 days.
But I wouldn't be shocked if that was a worse concussion, because he was immediately listed as 2 weeks, but maybe that's the 12
They
day.
said 1 to 2 weeks, they said on the injury list. So I don't know if
but
that's
normally
the
they never
days.
put 1 to 2 weeks, but
That's
maybe it's the
week,
10-day, maybe it's because of.
Yeah, well,
But it
Friday is
was
day
he
12.
didn't come off the ground concussed. He got delayed symptoms afterwards.
Yeah. Might not be playing.
Yeah, that's never a good sign. I wouldn't think that's a good sign. Not that I'm a doctor. I think that's what caused his. That's what caused his appendicitis. No, so hopefully he does come in.
Well, is he allowed to put pen to paper and sign that contract extension that he did during the week if he's still in the 12 days concussion protocols?
Good. He thought he was legalities of that.
Yeah, good point.
So I hope he comes in. And do we have any other injuries?
Nothing was listed in the post game. When it says injuries reports and all that. So
I would like to see, hopefully Colt comes in, and I want Sparrow back. Well, hopefully Sparrow, because Sparrow was the other standout. Like, he had 20 possessions in the first half, and I think in the first half he had 8 possessions. He was much quieter in the second half, but I just love that for a player who gets dropped. First time he's played at Casey since 21, I believe. So,
But you know what? So he should. He's a premiership player. He should be tearing it up. But you don't want to see those guys get there and not be able to get the ball.
Bloody, where's Hunter? Where's his attack on the ball going back? So, you know what I mean? Like,
I think plenty of players go back and
crack the sads and don't perform. He comes out and gets 20 possessions and something like 8 tackles in the first half of footy.
Well, that's what you expect. Because if they don't do that, they never play footy again.
So I think he'll come back in, and the Colt, and then I guess I'd take ŵeci out and then sort of change up.
Murray, Billings.
I think Laurie, I would take Billings out and ŵeci, and then bring Colt in maybe off the bench and put Sparrow back in the middle.
But ŵeci comes out of defence. Colt's not going into
Well,
fence,
he's
the
all
Sparrow's
over,
not
like
going
he's
into-
a utility essentially, so they can
but
shuffle
they've
that
been
all
playing
around.
that.
He's not really coming out of defence. He's sort of like basically the role 𝗟𝗲's playing is not a million miles different to Sparrow. He's like a utility that can get to plug and play. And just quickly, the other weird thing I thought about the selection was the use of the sub, having Turner as a sub.
Yeah.
I think maybe the conditions. I thought that too.
Sorry.
I thought. You thought that maybe if Max went down later, or
that's for me the logic was that's why you have him as a sub as protection in case you need Max. But
a
they
big
didn't.
man, yeah.
But he didn't offer us any run, did he? In that last quarter, I thought that was a really curious decision.
I thought maybe the conditions as well. That they thought another big man.
Go small instead of tall. Given they were forecasting
sub though.
Yeah, I don't know.
That was a query, and I figured, they have him as sub for backup for Maxi, but that was, I thought, a bit strange.
George changes.
Yeah, I think it's much the same. Billings definitely an out. Sparrow comes in, Colt if he's available, and 𝗟𝗲's the logical one if Colt does come in. But from the sounds of it, delayed concussions, I think we'll be lucky to see him.
Round 21 opens with a Friday night blockbuster at Marvel Stadium between the 2021 grand finalists. The Demons are desperate for a win to keep their finals hopes alive, whilst the Dogs are brimming with confidence, having won 4 out of their last 5 games, most recently having knocked off the premiership favourites, the Swans, by 39 points. A loss to the Demons will almost certainly end their 2024 season. Demon WA says, bit worried about how we could go at Marvel against the Hot Dogs. What changes to the game plan can we expect on the smaller ground? And we've also got a voicemail from Roadstar. And I was just thinking, we didn't hear from 𝗟𝗲. 𝗟𝗲, I hope you're okay.
Hey, Demonland legends, Roadstar here again. And I'll be sure to keep this under the 2 minutes this week. Don't want to talk to myself again. Although I did plenty of that on the weekend, sort of trying to navigate the loss as I usually do, trying to figure out what's happened. But this week, slightly different. I think been taking a few of Bin Man's, maybe been listening too much of Bin Man, but
no, that's
on the positive side, I went and did a ladder predictor, and seems like the magic number's 13 wins for this year. 13 wins and percentage. So many teams are so close and so many teams play each other in these last 4 rounds that we're not out of the finals race. I know it seems crazy and it seems like, we've sort of been saying this is a must win for so many weeks, but obviously we need to, if we win all 4 from here, we're in. If we lose 1, we need either results or percentage to go our way. So let's just win them all from here and get into the finals. And I think it's anyone's premiership this year. Look at Sydney and Carlton looking shaky, and probably the form teams are Brisbane, Hawthorn, and the Dogs, which we come up against this week. So just would be curious to know your thoughts on what do you think we can do to beat the Doggies this week. I'll be there in Marvel Stadium to cheer them on, and we'll see how we go. But I guess we just got to fix up. We're getting opposition too many possessions, aren't we? We're giving them too many uses of the ball, and they seem to be waltzing out of the centre bounce, which is interesting. Be curious to know why you think that is, Bin Man, why our centre bounces have been so poor. But all right, that's my 2 minutes up, lads. So I'll chat to you.
You missed the 2 minutes. Well, we've talked about the centre bounces, so you can listen to the later. Bin Man, followed by George. How are we going to beat the all-conquering Doggies, stave off and unceremoniously dumping from finals contention for another week?
All right.
We can also talk to Demon WA. He's a bit worried about Marvel. You're not so worried about Marvel.
No. So the cold hard data. I'm just looking at Wheelo Ratings AFL match previews, which is excellent, by the way. So anyone who it really is terrific. It's got all sorts of data, tennis and ATP and AFL, NBL, but the AFL stuff is all I look at, and it's brilliant. And he has a match preview for every game with basically the sort of data, and he has uses purple for when a team is sort of in the advantage, and there's a hell of a lot of purple in the Western Bulldogs column. So summary prediction for Wheelo is Western Bulldogs by 27.7 points and a 79.8% confidence level. Their attack is plus 9.1 and our attack is minus 6.1. Their defense is plus 11.7 and ours is plus 3.2. Overall, the rating is team rating is plus 20.8. Western Bulldogs, who in the last 6 weeks, they're by far and away with Hawthorn the two form teams in the AFL, and we're minus 2.9 overall. Rating points, as I mentioned, so is 17 points to minus 5.1 this season. So statistically, it looks like a nightmare, but I think we're going to win. And I think we're going to play a heavy contest forward half game, go back to 21, 22, and basically throw all our eggs in the basket of pressure and contest. And the advantage for that is that really it's a joke of a football ground, Marvel Stadium. I can't believe they built a purpose-built football ground that is narrow as it is. And that's going to be our saving grace, because they won't, they'll play fast. They've got a lot of skillful players. Our defense matches up well against their offense in all terms of their tools up forward. And I just don't think that they'll be able to exploit our lack of run the way the Dogs and Freo did, and the way the Bombers tried to do but couldn't, partly because of the weather. So it really isn't so much the pace, the sort of in a straight line pace, that's the worry for us. It's the spread and our inability at the moment to get across and cover. So I think if we we'll be much better placed to play the sort of footy we did in the first quarter for it to last the entire match this week. And I know this is, in all honesty, I feel more confident about this game than I did about the Giants game, and I think we'll win.
Whoa, George.
I think the opposite, unfortunately, for all the exact reasons. Their forward line is probably the best forward line in the league at the moment, with 𝗟cie, Norton and Ugle-Hagan. And 𝗟cie is a huge unit, and he knows how to play really well. I don't think we've got anyone that can match up on him.
Does that bring Tomlinson in the frame, you reckon, George?
No, he would get exposed. T-Mac's the best option, but he's giving away so much height to 𝗟cie. He's really, really developing very, very well. They've changed their style slightly. They gave Sydney an absolute walloping in the game, not just because Sydney were missing a couple of players. They just
they played great, didn't they?
They played an absolute fantastic. They're kicking the ball. They used to be flick it out, throw it out. Style of play. They're now kicking the ball. They've got a number of players who are very good at delivering the ball, and they
Law being one of them, underrated player, I reckon.
And Richards is one who's come on from nowhere in recent times.
West is super important. He's going to be hard. He's the sort of player we struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely. Garcia is another one who's come from nowhere. They're all good little inside users, and they know how to kick the ball. They spread so well. They really spread, and even though the ground's smaller, they move really quickly.
And they did in the SCG, which is narrow.
And so we struggled against GWS to keep up the pace. I think we'll struggle against them. The only hope I think we've really got is their defence isn't fantastic. It depends on Liam Jones being able to intercept.
And Lob is playing great.
And Lob, but
it's been good.
Lob's easily exposed, but he's a great big log to get rid of. But he's easily exposed. If you've got someone, Melcham might have to do something. If he was able to cut out a Liam Jones, then it really exposes their back line. And we need people like Fritsch to pull his finger out and do some work, and as well. The Bulldogs are in great form. I think we're going to really struggle against them.
Well, the big factor, and it should not be ignored, this is a huge factor in footy, is they're coming off a 5-day break and travel. So played Sydney even though they played super well, that was a pretty tough game for at least 3 quarters. Physically, it was a pretty tough game. So they travel and 5 days. It is a huge factor. There's no question that's advantage us. we're 6 days, but no need to travel, back in their beds on Saturday night. They wouldn't have been back from Sydney until midnight in their beds at 2 a.m.
We saw what happened to Carlton last week. The same thing.
Exactly. So, it depends on how their preparation is. They might have prepared to be able to peak for these 2 games. But if they didn't and put a lot of eggs in the Swans basket, they're going to struggle to play with the same zest and energy as they did on Sunday.
Well, I don't know if it's playing into my MFCSS, but I think George was more convincing than you, Big Man. So.
Well, they are. Melbourne is like $2.80 and the Dogs at $1.40, so it's like not as if it's radical to say that the Dogs are going to win. So, I'm actually legitimately really bullish.
All right, boys, we're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week. If you want to listen to the show live, head on over to Demonland.com on Monday night at our new earlier time of 7:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewer on Apple Podcasts. That's a thanks to Elijah. Thank you to our voicemail.
Don't thank him too much, Andy. You'll get a big head.
Yeah, I think so. I hope the payment went through. Thank you to our voicemailers, Dan the Demon from our Instagram, Rose Star, Adam from North Brisbane, and our unknown caller. Your questions and comments, they form an integral part of the show. It's just an extension of the Demonland.com forum in essence. So thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Jane02, Monocular, Lazy, Ross Millen, Alex No Fancy Name, Logs, Stinger, Red Jacket, Spirit of Norm Smith, Wells 11, Lefty, Oh My D's, Bigfoot, Singer, Mandy Laurie and Smurf, Track Forever, Doug Reamer, Buck Naked, El Diablo 14, Demon WA, What, Say What, and John Demonic. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bin Man, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from, and we'll read it out on the next week's show. Go Demons!
Go Red Leggers!